Hello and welcome. This is From Upside Down to Right Side Up, Tips for the Transition. And I'm Maria Tomas Keegan, your host. Thank you for joining us. This is my continuing series of conversations with down-to-earth, resilient women who have an inspiring story to share. And my guests offer us hope that our own situation is not the end of our story, but just the beginning. They prove that there is light at the end of the tunnel. My special guest today is Dr. Michelle Peticolas. She will share a story about many different life events which should have changed her profoundly, but she shut herself down early in life. It wasn't until a particular event hit her like a ton of bricks that she realized she was just going through the motions of life. We call this episode Living Without Regret. Dr. Michelle, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. I love your story. I am inspired by it, and I can't wait for you to share it. So let's just jump right in and share your story about this pattern that I was talking about. How did all that unfold for you?
Right. So what people don't understand is that events that happen in early childhood can reverberate throughout your life. In fact, I was reading an article in the London Primary Care Journal, and this psychologist had done a review of the literature and shows that what happens to us in our first couple of years of life is from 1 to 3 to 5 maybe, there's so much going on that a small event can have a huge impact on you. And that's what happened to me. I was born into a family in which there were 2 children already born. My mother was very young and inexperienced. My father bonded with me. My mother did not. She was overwhelmed. So I bonded with my father, and for 2 years, I was happy. And then he, being in the military, he was transferred to Japan. And I don't recall this, but I experience it on a daily basis, this feeling of waking up in the morning in a state of semi-panic. Now, I'm not so panicked anymore, but I recognize that feeling of dread that happens when I wake up. And this is deeply embedded in my system because my father left. And children need love and nurturance to feel safe. I'm sure I screamed and cried and ranted and raved. My mother was in the process of moving us to Japan. She didn't have any space for me. So I tamped down my emotions. Because guess what? If you don't tamp down your emotions, you become dehydrated. You eventually make yourself sick. So I tamped down my emotions, and I developed a pattern which you may recognize as people pleasing. It is a pattern that is certainly encouraged in this culture for women. I think part of the reason I developed it is that I switched my allegiance from my father to my sister, who was 2 years older than me. And you can imagine that a 2-year-old is probably not particularly unconditional in their loving. So I developed real amazing skills for sussing out what the needs and wants of another person were. And this worked really well for all of my school days. Teachers love students like me who want to please them. I got National Honor Society, Phi Beta Kappa. I was one of 2 graduate students in my class to complete her PhD. And then this big event happened. I got my first teaching job, my first college teaching job. And I threw myself into it, all the pleasing. I, joined the faculty committees. I taught night classes. I taught adult ed classes. I taught new classes. I had evaluation people come in and look at my teaching. I even coached the women's cross country team. And halfway into my second year, I got a letter from the dean saying that they were not going to renew my contract. I was devastated. My plan for success, people pleasing, had failed me. I got depressed, I got sick, and I ran away. I thought that the problem wasn't that the plan was wrong, that the problem was that I had set my sights too high. So I set my sights lower. I became smaller. I took jobs that were actually beneath my education, my intelligence, my brilliance. Because I did not want to be fired. I did not want to be rejected. And actually, who wants to be rejected, right? Who wants to be rejected in this world? And I certainly didn't. For me, it was like total condemnation. So I went through a series of jobs. I was a house parent. You can imagine, PhD. Well, I wasn't PhD quite yet, but I was a house parent. And I have to say that I learned a lot of skills from that. Taking care of emotionally disturbed adolescents will really teach you a lot about nurturing and a lot about the troubles of youth. Then in the course during that time, I finished my PhD. I thought the world was going to open up for me. Hey, I did it, right? I finally got my PhD. And 3 things happened to me. One, my father came out to visit me, and I asked him what he thought about my PhD, and he said it made him feel ashamed because he had never gotten his BA. Oh, great. My success, had made my father feel bad. The second thing was that we had been living on the Navajo reservation, working with Native Americans, and we moved, my husband and I, to Santa Fe, and we were supposed to prove ourselves there. Well, I had my PhD. I had finally gotten the credential, and I asked my boss if he would introduce me to social services. We were working with tribes as Dr. Peticolas, and he said to me, "Why don't you tattoo it to your forehead?" Blow number two. Blow number 2. Oh my gosh. I felt so humiliated that I did not use my title for about 5 years. I was like, I was just mortified. And then the third blow was that my husband left me. He left me because the same boss who had humiliated me promoted me, and he fired my husband. Not a good situation for marital harmony. So my husband left me. So there I had 3 blows. My father was hurt, my boss humiliated me, and my husband left me. And I said, okay, so I guess I am not supposed to play it big. If I play it big, I will be rejected. So the next thing I did, I said, okay, I'm going to join a spiritual community where relationships and work don't matter. The only thing that matters is connection with divine spirit. And for 13 years, I lived and breathed that spirituality, and I would go back into the work world for just enough time to earn the money that I needed to take care of myself so that I could go back to the spiritual retreat. And I have to say that what I did was I transferred all of my needs for approval. And that's what people pleasing is about, is being approved of, being loved and getting and receiving attention. It is a an effort to get what you need from the outside world and pull it in. It's actually a manipulation. And that later is what I learned, but I didn't know it at that time. It seemed like this was the way the world worked, is that you had to earn love, and that the way to earn love was to figure out what other people needed. So with my spiritual teacher, same thing. I was a workaholic. Whatever he wanted, I would stay up late. I would be there working, and whatever he wanted, I was doing his videos. I was editing his books, whatever he wanted. But the one thing I wanted was to be a dancer, because he had all these beautiful dancers that would dance. He would drum and they would all dance, and I wanted to be a dancer. And so I kept on trying to be a dancer. And so one time we had an event we were supposed to go to. This was in New York City, and he wanted me to videotape the dance, but I said, well, do you want me to dance? And he said, oh, well, you could dance. So I'm dressing up, and this is Middle Eastern dance. So these are belly dance costumes, okay? Empty, bare midriff. And I'm out in this huge auditorium, freezing cold. It's in the middle of winter. And I'm standing there with the video camera, videotaping for 2 hours, videoing other dancers. And he had promised me that he would send somebody out to replace me. Now, when it looks like the whole show is over, he sends somebody out. Now, I'm frozen stiff, not to mention that my emotions are in shreds. I mean, I could barely keep from crying. And I'm up on the stage and he tells me to dance. Well, I couldn't dance. And afterwards, it was like this flood of emotions. But something came of that. It was the first step towards my healing. And that was that I decided that I would not let him or anybody decide how good my dancing was. That I would dance because it felt good, because it was my connection to divine.
Well, that is a story loaded with stuff. I don't even know where to begin, Dr. Michelle. What the thread that I hear woven throughout this, and it's the need to be loved, the need to be acknowledged, the need to be feel worthy, and the way, and we'd all do this. I'm a recovering people pleaser myself. The way we do this is by making sure everybody else is okay. Understanding what they need and fulfilling that need to our own sometimes destruction. So there's so much tied up there in those stories with all of the three major events. And I know this is not the end of the story, and what I'd like to do next is get into the emotional journey that you went on, because it sounds to me like the universe tried to let you know a bunch of times that there was something you should pay attention to, and you weren't quite hearing it or heeding it yet. So I'd love to know a bit more about that, and what were some of the emotions that you went through in this roller coaster ride of events in your journey. So will you do that in our next segment?
I sure will.
Perfect.
Should I go ahead now?
Nope, we're going to take a little break right
awesome.
now. No problem. We're going to be right back, just a very short break. We're going to be right back with From Upside Down to Right Side Up, Tips for the Transition. Let's continue my conversation with Dr. Michelle Peticolas, which we call Living Without Regret. As a career and life coach specializing in transition, I work with women after their world has turned upside down by major life events. So it is always an honor to share inspiring stories like Dr. Michelle's, because these women are figuring out how to move through life's inevitable trials and tribulations and come out on top in their own unique version of triumph. They help us to know that we're not alone and that there is hope for the rest of us. So, Dr. Michelle, thank you for pulling back the curtain on your journey, the beginning of your journey. I know we're going to get into a bit more of it now, and I'd like to look a little deeper into that emotional ride we spoke about before we ended the last segment, and help us to understand how you were able to rediscover who you are.
Okay, great. So after that moment or experience with my Sufi teacher where I felt totally humiliated about my dancing, I really did start to change. To his credit, he had been pushing me to wake up all those years I was with him. He was always pushing me over my limits to try and wake me up. And I believe that this was part of my lesson, was to realize that I had to stop putting my sense of who I was in the hands and the judgment of another person. After that, very soon after that, I met my current husband, who actually came to the spiritual retreat and showed up. And I made overtures and we got connected. And at the spiritual retreat, everything seemed wonderful. But as soon as we got back into the real world, it was clear to me very early on that if I didn't deal with my abandonment issues, which is what that whole thing is about, abandonment. My father left, and even though he came back, he never rebonded with me. That's abandonment. And it can be as simple as that. I had a client in which she had got pneumonia when she was just barely 2 years old, was put in an isolation unit. And to this day, she has severe fear of being left alone. It's that powerful. Anyway, I realized that literally I was looking for signs of rejection. Now, that's a hell of a way to try and develop a relationship, is to always be looking for signs. So I decided to do some early childhood emotional healing, and I did an amazing process. And what happened now, certainly part of the spiritual work was a work of the heart. So it was opening up my heart, and it was making me more intelligent, I gotta say. But then this healing really opened up my emotional system. So now my emotions are online. Most of us are afraid of our emotions, and because they're so powerful and can be so overwhelming. And when you relate them to when you were 2 years old, they seem completely out of the world. So now I have these emotions online and they're okay. But then my parents start dying. First, my father dies, and he had Alzheimer's for many years. And so in some ways, his dying was a relief and a release. But then my mother, shortly after he dies, her breast cancer returns. And I go out to help her finish up her business. My mother was a toy designer. Not a hugely successful in the monetary sense toy designer, but she actually had a major impact on the toy industry. She would go into New York. She sold her designs to E.G. Dolls, Gund, Hasbro, Sears. I mean, major toy companies. She and my aunt worked together. I, as a child, just felt neglected. I didn't want to have anything to do with her business. I didn't even want to recognize her. So here I am sitting with her basically 2 weeks from her death, sitting in her studio. and I'm the industrious daughter. I'm going through papers, and I pick up a photocopy of one of her designs, and I hand it to her, and I say, "Do you need this anymore?" And she looks at it, and she says, "Oh, I guess I'll never get to that project." In that moment, I understood what deadline really meant. Her feelings and the feelings that welled up in me were overwhelming. And I was just new to them. I was scared. So I took the paper back and I said, "We don't need to deal with this right now." And so instead of holding the space for her, instead of allowing her to face her death, to face her regret, I ran away. And that moment of intimacy, the intimacy that I had wanted with her all my life, was lost forever. 2 weeks later, she was dead. And her moment of regret, and understand, she was the poster child for living her purpose, to the neglect sometimes of her children, but she lived her passion. And if she could have regret, what did that say about me? It catalyzed me. It woke me up. I said to myself, no, I will not live my life with regret. I decided, well, because death, the experience of my parents' death had so woken me up, had so shocked me, I decided to make a film about death, which morphed into a 3-part series in which I explored the emotions around facing death, around caring for somebody. And I didn't believe that I was a particularly good caregiver. I mean, after all, I missed that chance with my mom. And about grieving and what the power was in that. And that occupied like 10 years of my life, creating those films and sharing those films to the community, to wake people up that life is too short and we need to live fully. And that was my commitment, is I'm going to do whatever it takes to live my purpose.
Dr. Michelle, you leave me speechless because you have shared so much profound information, and your journey is so it's so like so many others that I have heard, and my own included. This idea of living with regret, of not living our life on purpose, of holding space for someone who is opening themselves up, especially when that was something that you longed for since you were a child, and you missed the opportunity to actually experience that. That's so sad to me, and it's so often the case. I think it is almost always in hindsight that we look back on times like that and say, I wish I had done it differently. I wish I had said something else. I wish I had said nothing. There's so many what if scenarios we can play that can fill us with regret. And I love what you shared, that you learned from that it woke you up, and it put you on a path that dictates how you live today without regret. So I love that you shared that. I love that you shared that. Thank you so much for it. And there are so many lessons that you wove into that part of your story. And there are challenges, right, that we all have to face at one time or another. What I'd love to hear next from you, Dr. Michelle, is some more of those lessons. Help us to understand from your perspective, from your journey, and from your training. What is it that we can learn from you, so that maybe we can get better at being more centered in who we are. So will you do that with us in our next segment?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
I would love to.
Thank you. So everyone, please stay tuned. We're going to be right back with tips for the transition. We're about to wrap up my conversation with Dr. Michelle. I believe that each one of us is a resource for someone else, which is why I share these kinds of stories and end each episode with life lessons and strategies that hopefully you can choose to adapt to your own life. And it's why we call this show Tips for the Transition. Before we hear Dr. Michelle's tips, I'd like to tell you just a bit more about her. She is a best-selling author, an award-winning national speaker, and a transformational life coach. She has her PhD, as you heard, in sociology and psychology, and over 30 years of experience in helping women leaders, entrepreneurs, and change makers to stop sabotaging their success in work and love by helping them release guilt connected with the loss of an important relationship. After the death of her mother, as she told you, she produced the award-winning 3-part documentary series, Secrets of Life and Death, which is screened in universities and hospitals and hospices throughout the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Dr. Michelle is one of those women who inspire me to be better and who are role models for the rest of us when it comes to learning to thrive. Dr. Michelle, thank you so much for all that you have shared so far. And I can't wait. I'm literally on the edge of my seat to hear what are the nuggets of wisdom, those lessons that you've learned throughout that you can help our audience to learn from you. So go ahead, what's your first one?
Okay, so the very first one, and this is really important, is that nothing is wasted. There is no failure, that everything in your life is training you for your purpose. That everything I experienced in the course of I was like 48 years old when my parents died. All of that continues to be useful in working with people to empower them, because I understand, because I've been through it. And if you haven't been through it, how can you help somebody? You have to know the territory. That's number one. Number two
let's stop there. Hold on a second. I want to focus on that one just for a second, because that's so important. It's so important that we understand that we're all on this journey, and that and I'm going to bring regret back into this particular lesson that you're teaching us, because when we look back with regret, it stops us from being open to the lesson, doesn't it?
That's right. That's right. If I hadn't had that experience with my mother, I would not have ever changed. It was her transmission. on a soul level, I think she was trying to wake me up, that she had been trying to do that all of her life. And how tragic for her to have seen me not step into my brilliance, to have tamped myself down, to make myself small. And her final gift was to wake me up. So see, everything, there's nothing wasted.
Yeah, nothing wasted. I think that's beautiful. Okay, what's number 2?
So number 2, and this is really important, is that we are spiritual beings having a human adventure, and we inhabit these physical bodies, and they have their own agenda, completely irrespective of what our brilliant soul mind has in mind. And one of those primary objectives is to keep us alive. And when we come into our bodies, they are tiny little babies, vulnerable, dependent, and they learn these patterns of behavior to survive. If you're alive now, it worked, didn't it? And people pleasing is one of the most pernicious of patterns, because you have so much success and you get so much affirmation and you get so much appreciation for it, that it is a very hard pattern to break. And you'd say, well, why break it? Because to be powerful, to share your true authentic self, you have to break the pattern. You have to become who you really are, authentic. People pleasing is not about being yourself. People pleasing is about focusing out into the world out there and saying, what do you want? And never asking yourself, what do I want? And you cannot really share your gifts and fulfill your mission in this life without reconnecting to your brilliance, to why you're here, to your why. So it's a tug of war.
It is. And when you said, why would you want to change it? I remember struggling with that question in my own life. I was very successful at making everybody else look really good. I was this behind the scenes person that made everybody else look good. And I was playing small, never stepping out into myself, discovering what my gifts were and allowing those to shine so that I could stand beside them rather than behind them. So I totally resonate with that story and that question, why should we change? But you're right, until we do, we can't really step into our own purpose and get on that journey that awakens us along the way.
So here's another little iteration about this people pleasing, is you can be out in the public eye and still be a people pleaser. And that is that you put all the power out into your audience. And you are not truly who you are. You have put a mask on. And you can pretend that you're powerful. But if it doesn't come from inside, they all know it. They know it at a certain level. And if you want to make a difference in people's lives, if you want to be a coach, if you want to be a leader, you have to be real. You have to be who you are. You cannot be anybody else.
Yeah.
And that means giving up the people. That means giving up the people pleasing. Go on.
Yeah, no, I talk about wearing masks all the time because it is something that we often do, sometimes out of necessity, especially when we're going through really, really difficult, life-changing events and we have to show up outside. We do have to wear masks every once in a while, but you're right. If that becomes our norm and we never take the mask off to allow ourselves to breathe and be, then it doesn't work. It does backfire. It backfires. Okay, what's number 3?
So number 3 is community. It is, in addition to having these bodies, and that part of that whole thing is that we are social animals. I sometimes call us herd animals. I don't know if that's true, except that we depend on each other to survive. A little human infant will not survive without its parents. We are not sea turtles. Our parents do not bury us in the sand and leave us, and then we can survive. We actually need our parents for 18, 20, 30, 50 years. I mean, we as an animal species, we are one of the few, if not the only ones, who bond with our children for life. Bears send their cubs up into a tree. Birds kick their kids out of the nest. Cats push their kittens away. At a certain point, it's like, it's done, guys, we're finished. Parents of human children are never finished. They are helping their children until they die. So community is really, really important. And how our community responds to us has a huge impact. So if you're trying to change, if you're trying to step into your brilliance, to be your authentic self, you may get pushback from your community. What we tend to do is choose our community based upon what we experienced in childhood, because that's what we're used to. That's what we're comfortable with. And then as we start to change, there's a little bit of friction there. Some people are going to be able to come along with us, but many will not. So there may be a changing of that. And you have to develop a certain amount of resilience to handle the rejection and the questioning and the lack of support, and develop new systems of support. That's why I invite people who are stepping into their power to get a good coach, somebody who can keep them on their path, that believes in them and encourages them to move forward. Sometimes it's enough just to have one person who's there holding you and holding the container for you.
That is such a powerful advice. I believe in it with my heart and my soul, and it's one of the things I also teach to my clients about that, the power of having what I call a personal board of directors, so that we are never feel like we are alone, and that there is always someone that we can reach out to. And having a coach is a brilliant idea. You and I are both coaches, so we know, and we've had coaches, right? So
Oh, yes.
Yeah, oh yeah. So we know the power behind having that person to guide us and to be there to support us unconditionally and objectively, with some tough love most of the time.
Well, it's really hard for us to see our blind spots.
True.
They're called blind spots for a reason, right? And if we were to only listen to our own inner voice, we're going to be listening to that wounded child, and also to the body, which has its own agenda of keeping you alive, of protecting you from rejection. When you think about us as being communal animals, losing the approval of your community at a certain era, that meant death. You could not survive alone. Now, of course, we have supermarkets and cell phones, but that wasn't always the case. And even now, it can have a huge impact on you, that if you are totally isolated, you can lose your health, you can lose your way.
Yeah, you can lose so much. Dr. Michelle, I don't know how to thank you for all that you have shared, all that you have shared about your own journey and what you've learned from it, and all of these great, awesome tips for our audience. I am sure that some of the people watching today are going to want to connect directly with you. So I'd like you to watch this. Dr. Michelle, I appreciate so much that you were with us today. And if any tidbit of information that she shared struck a chord with you, please, I encourage you to reach out to her. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of this community. This series of conversations is inspired by my latest book, Upside Down to Right Side Up, Turning Transition into Triumph. My book, my coaching programs, and these conversations share life strategies that can help us when our own world turns upside down. I invite you to share them with the women in your life so none of us will ever again feel like we are alone. And if you need to chat with someone about your own personal situation, reach out to me or one of my guests for guidance and support. Many of us have gone through similar experiences, and we're here to help and get you through your journey with more ease and grace. And if you have an inspiring story of your own to share, I would love to hear it. So my contact information follows. I believe it's our time to thrive. Will you join me on that ride? I'm Maria Tomas Keegan. Till next time.